Legends Z2A. The game Pokemon released a grand total of 1 teaser for and decided to let content creators decipher and fend for themselves like we're moonshiners during the Prohibition. So today we're going to be discussing the starters that everybody seems to want, the starters that everybody seems to not want, and try to narrow down what starters we're actually going to get. And I'm exactly 0% sure that 100% of my predictions are going to be correct. Let's do it. Before getting into the weeds and really sinking our teeth into this adventure, I think it would be wise to admit that there have been many videos and leaks about this topic to already grace the internet. But over the years, I've learned that we really don't know what we're gonna get from the Pokemon Company until, well, we get it. And while there are favorites that seem to pop up in every list and every leak, more on that later, I'm gonna evaluate each starter's possibility and likelihood of making the cut for Legends Z2A using this beautiful scale, starting with the no way section, which are the least likely, and making my way all the way up to the squad section, which are the most likely to make the game. I wanted to call this section the Squirtle Squad, but I recognize how confusing that could possibly be, and I often hurt myself when I get confused. Okay, welcome to the not gonna happen section where we kill hopes and dreams. Well, the Pokemon Company does, I should say. This section consists of 4 groups of starters. The Kanto starters, the Paldea starters, the Gen 3 starters, and the starters from Legends Arceus. The Kanto starters are iconic, obviously, but they aren't gonna be the starters for this game. Quite frankly, they're almost too iconic, and it's important for Pokemon to spread the starter love around. Not to mention the heavy Charizard bias and the fact that these starters all have Mega Evolutions. I think all 3 starters will be obtainable, but much more likely as post-adventure additions. The Gen 9 starters also will not be present as the starters for Z2A. I'm not gonna spend too much time on these 3, it's just far too close to the release of Scarlet and Violet. I do, however, think their existence could influence Pokemon's decisions when it comes to the starters for Z2A. But I don't see these starters being in the games at all. I'm also gonna go ahead and rule out the Gen 3 starters. They also have Mega Evolutions. And although I'm unsure about whether the first starters you receive in this game will get Mega Evolutions, I'm just gonna go ahead and rule out this group. It seems really unlikely to me. Finally, we have the starters from the first installment of the Legends series, Legends Arceus. And I just think it would be quite boring to run the same starters again for the same series. However, even though I don't think we'll see these 3 starters, I do think there will be similarities from these 3 starters to the new 3 starters. The biggest similarity being variations to the final evolutions of the starters. It's important to point this out because Legends Z2A will be bringing back Mega Evolution, and people aren't sure whether the starters for the game will be receiving Mega Evolutions or variations to their final evolutions, or both. My theory is that the starter we receive at the beginning of the game will have a variant, and the starter that we receive later in the game will have a Mega Evolution. Just like in Pokemon X and Y when we received a Kanto starter. Why? Because I believe we will be receiving a Gen 7 starter in a similar way that we received a Kanto starter in X and Y. And just like X and Y, this second starter will have the ability to Mega Evolve, which is why I will be placing the Gen 7 starters in the not likely category, because I believe that they will be in the games with the ability to Mega Evolve, just not as our first starters. It's a perfect way to give some love to the Gen 7 group and bring them into the region in a natural way. Another group I'm throwing in the not likely section are the Gen 8 starters, and I'm doing so for 2 reasons. Number 1, and this may just be a personal thing, but it just feels too soon. This opinion is definitely historically inaccurate based on the fact that we got Rowlet, a Gen 7 starter in Legends Arceus, but I still think it's a little too soon to revisit our friends from Galar. Reason number 2, these starters are quintessentially English. While it's true that every starter incorporates aspects of the real-world location that the region is inspired by, the Galarian starters took this to a whole new level. Fuecoco is a fire-breathing crocodile that loves to eat and looks like and is shaped like a pepper. Perfect for a region with a rich and spicy culinary history and cultural ties to crocodiles and ghost peppers. Scorbunny is a soccer bunny. That's it. It's just a soccer bunny. And while France was the birthplace of FIFA, England was the birthplace of football. Or soccer, whatever you call it. I'm throwing them in the not likely category. If I had to guess a starter from Gen 8 that the Pokemon Company might use, I would go with Sobble, considering France's history with famous spies. But again, And now, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the part of the show that we've all been waiting for. We've narrowed down the starter possibilities to 9 Pokemon, 3 for each type, and we're gonna be discussing the type that I think everyone wants to discuss, and that would be the water type starter. Why has the water type been such a popular topic of discussion leading up to this game? Well, folks, that would be because of this guy, but also this guy. And this guy. Totodile is incredibly popular and has main character energy in the anime, and also happens to be the second starter that I ever chose. A lot of Pokemon fans have similar fond memories of the Generation 2 Croc, and I think this has propelled Totodile into the Legend Z to A starter conversation. But while I do think it's possible that Totodile could be chosen as the water starter for Z to A, I do have some reservations on that possibility. Let's start with why Totodile could be our water starter first. While crocodiles don't have the foundation that other animals have in French culture, one crocodile in particular had a massive cultural impact on Paris, the city in France that Lumiose City, the supposed home base city for Legend Z to A, is based off of. In 1984, a Nile crocodile was found in the Paris sewers, apparently feeding on rats and garbage. This, understandably, created quite the news buzz and would be an interesting origin story for a starter in the series. Not only that, but the sewers were redeveloped in the mid-19th century, the same time frame that Legend Z to A seems to be inspired by. It is for these reasons that Totodile has generated attention as the Z to A starter. However, I think we could make an equally compelling argument for the other 2 candidates here. Piplup has been what seems to be the leading candidate for the water starter for Z to A, mostly because of Empoleon's name, physical characteristics, and various similarities between the final evolution and the famous Frenchman and Emperor, Napoleon. And while France, and especially Paris, does not have penguins, it did used to have great auks, who many in France just regarded as penguins. While they did go extinct in the 18th century, I think these reasons illustrate why Piplup probably got strong consideration from the Pokemon Company. But Popplio has a lot of similar evidence working for it. Sea lions themselves aren't native to France, but according to 18th century French mythology, mermaids very much are. And of course, Popplio evolves into Primarina for its final evolution, who is, of course, a mermaid. However, against all odds, I'm gonna go with Totodile as our water starter. Alright, time to get spicy and talk about the fire type. And if we're following the same steps that we took to narrow down the water starters, that leaves us with Chimchar, Tepig, and Litten as our starter options here. And in order to address the big kitten in the room, I'm gonna go ahead and rule out Litten. The Pokemon Company has given this Pokemon, specifically Incineroar, so much love over the years that, although I wouldn't be surprised if Litten is a starter in this game, I'm gonna explore a different option. And that option is going to be Tepig. I think Tepig would be a great option as the fire starter for this game for a few reasons. Wild boars are heavily present, unlike monkeys in Chimchar's case, throughout France. And while Emboar doesn't immediately give off a royalty vibe, I think it's safe to assume that one of these starters will have some sort of French royalty tie-in to it, just given the time period that most of us believe this game will be based on. And to me, Emboar has just enough of a royalty aesthetic that it could easily be given a makeover to further accentuate these qualities. Not only that, but food played a major role in accelerating the events of the French Revolution. A fire type that resembles a boar could act as a perfect chef for the times, and could be hilariously ironic given that people in power and French royalty were killed during the French Revolution by a bunch of starving people. And there also happens to be a famous book by George Orwell called Animal Farm. In this beautiful piece of satire, a group of farm animals rebel against their farmer in order to live a more independent life, much like the French Revolution. These farm animals are led by a boar, and in a shocking turn of events, this boar is named, you guessed it, Napoleon. Out of all the starters that we've discussed, the one I feel will most likely be in this game is Tepig. Okay, so it is grass starter time. And if we, again, apply my previous logic, we're left with these 3. And despite the loud and never-ending cries for Snivy here, I'm gonna go with Turtwig, the 3rd starter whose name begins with a T on my list. And before you click away and threaten my life for not choosing Snivy, hear me out. Whether it's directly or indirectly, I believe that the reconstruction of Lumiose City will be a massive component to this game. And I think Torterra, Turtwig's final evolution will be a reflection of that. Rather than being a grass and ground type like its normal form, I believe the Legends Z to A Torterra will be a grass and steel type to sort of mirror the city's redevelopment. I really feel this selection makes a lot of sense, almost too much sense, and would fit the game beautifully. Snivy just seems too obvious to me, and trust me, I wouldn't mind at all if it did end up being the grass starter. But based on everything we know, I feel strongly we'll be seeing Turtwig as the grass starter here. One thing that I feel like we'll see between all the starters is some sense of functionality when it comes to building or construction. Like I said, I feel like the redevelopment of the city is going to play a major role in the game, even if we're just indirectly involved. And I think every starter's final evolution will have some sort of functionality or role to play in that redevelopment. Whether that's construction, cooking, or killing all the rats under the city and the sewers. And I tried to put that logic in play when selecting the 3 starters for this game, rather than just looking at all the starters and saying, oh, that one looks the most French, let me just choose that one. And I think it's safe to say that that's probably not the way it's gonna go. So feel free to rip me a new one if I'm completely wrong and we get all the French looking Mons as the starters. I just try to take everything we know and try to make the most logical list possible. And these are the 3 I came up with. I hope you have a wonderful day and check out the rest of the channel if you get the chance. Okay.